Around 1185 BC, on the Syrian coast, the city of Ugarit is burning. In the palace, a scribe presses wet clay with trembling fingers, carving a last message to a distant king. The enemy ships are already here. They have set fire to our towns and done evil things. The tablet is never sent. It bakes hard in the flames that swallow the city. That fire is not one city's misfortune. Across the eastern Mediterranean, within roughly 2 generations, nearly every great city will burn. Mycenae, Pylos, Hattusa, capital of a superpower, Troy. Kingdoms that traded gold and wrote letters to one another simply stop. An entire connected world, centuries in the making, is being erased almost at once. This is how a civilization ends. Historians call it the Late Bronze Age collapse. You might call it the first apocalypse, the day the known world ended. It happened around 1200 to 1150 BC, and it was so complete that in some lands people forgot how to write, forgot the names of their kings, and forgot the cities buried beneath their feet. This is that story. To understand the fall, picture the height. Around 1300 BC, the Bronze Age was a golden, interconnected age. Great powers, Egypt, the Hittites, Babylon, Assyria, Mycenaean Greece, knew one another by name. Kings called each other brother in letters of gold and greeting. It was, in its way, the first age of globalization, bound by trade, marriage, and shared luxury. We know their voices because they survive on clay. In Egypt, at a site called Amarna, archaeologists found hundreds of diplomatic letters, pharaohs and foreign kings haggling over gold, brides, and loyalty, demanding treasure as plentiful as dust. They reveal a world of embassies and etiquette, of anxious vassals begging Egypt for troops. For a moment, the powers of the ancient world spoke almost as one restless family. But this world had a hidden fragility, and its name was bronze. Bronze, the metal of every sword, plough, and cauldron, needs copper and tin. Copper came from Cyprus. Tin travelled thousands of miles, perhaps from Afghanistan. No single kingdom held both. To arm a soldier, you needed the whole network to function. Peace was not a virtue here. It was a supply chain. One shipwreck captures it perfectly. Off the coast of Turkey, near Uluburun, divers found a merchant vessel that sank around 1300 BC. Its cargo was a floating map of the age. 10 tons of Cypriot copper, tin, ebony, ivory, amber from the Baltic, and gold from Egypt. One small ship carried the wealth of an entire interconnected world across a dangerous sea. At the heart of each kingdom stood the palace. These were not just royal homes, but engines of the economy. Scribes recorded every sheep, every jar of oil, every bronze wheel on clay tablets. The palace gathered, stored, and redistributed almost everything. It was efficient, and it was brittle. Pull out the palace, and there was no market underneath to catch the fall. In Greece, the Mycenaeans were at their peak. Behind Cyclopean walls at Mycenae, Tiryns, and Pylos, warrior kings ruled from painted palaces. Their warriors wore bronze armor and helmets sewn from the tusks of wild boars. They kept accounts in an early Greek script we call Linear B. Homer would remember them, centuries later, as the heroes who sailed against Troy. Then around 1250 BC, the cracks began to show. At several Greek sites, walls were hastily strengthened and secret passages dug down to hidden water. The architecture of fear. Far to the east, Hittite letters speak of failed harvests and desperate pleas for grain. Something was straining the system. The great powers did not yet know it, but their golden age was ending. And then, out of the sea, came the raiders. Egyptian records describe waves of attackers striking from the water. and later historians gave them a single dramatic name, the Sea Peoples. But that name is modern shorthand. In truth, they were many groups, the Peliset, the Sherden, the Shekelesh, and who they really were and where they came from is still fiercely debated. They were probably not a single invading army, but something stranger, a tide of displaced people. Egyptian reliefs show not only warships, but ox carts loaded with women and children, whole families on the move. These were refugees as much as raiders, uprooted by the same disasters engulfing everyone else, and now driven to take by force what their own lands could no longer give. In his 8th year, around 1177 BC, Pharaoh Ramesses III met them on Egypt's frontier. On the temple walls at Medinet Habu, he carved his account in stone. No land could stand before their arms, the inscription says, listing kingdoms already swept away. Ramesses claims a great victory on land and in the Nile's mouths, a desperate battle to keep Egypt itself from drowning. Egypt survived, but it was never the same. The victory drained its treasury and its strength. Within a few generations, the age of the great pharaohs faded into weakness and division. The Sea Peoples were real and dangerous, but they were a symptom as much as a cause. To blame them alone is to mistake the smoke for the fire that made it. Return to Ugarit, that burning city on the Syrian shore. It was a rich port, a crossroads of scripts and languages. In its final days, its king wrote frantic letters. One begs an ally. The enemy's ships have come. They have burned my towns, and my own troops are away in Hittite lands. Help never arrived. Ugarit fell and was never rebuilt. North and inland, the Hittite Empire was one of the great powers of the age, rival to Egypt itself. Its capital, Hattusa, was a fortress city of stone gates guarded by carved lions. Then it too fell silent. Archaeologists find its ceremonial buildings burned, its stores emptied, its people gone. A superpower that had shaped the world for centuries simply vanished from history. Across the sea in Greece, the palaces fell one by one. Mighty Mycenae burned. At Pylos, the palace of Nestor went up in flames, so fierce they baked its clay tablets hard, accidentally preserving the last frantic records of a doomed kingdom. Some tablets speak of watchers posted on the coast, and of bronze being gathered for weapons. They were watching the sea. The list of the dead is staggering. Troy, Miletus, Alalak, Kadesh, Hazor. Site after site across 1,000 miles shows the same grim signature in the earth. A layer of ash, collapsed walls, and then, above it, silence. In perhaps 50 years, an estimated 40 to 50 great cities were destroyed, from the Peloponnese to the Levant. Whole regions were emptied of people who never returned. For a long time, people wanted one villain, a single sword to blame. The Sea Peoples, a great war, a tidal wave of barbarians. But the truth that scholars now favor is harder and far more unsettling. No one enemy did this. The Bronze Age world was not murdered by a single blow. It came apart at every seam at once. Historians call it a systems collapse, a perfect storm. Imagine a world so tightly interconnected that each kingdom depended on all the others. Trade, food, metal, defense, diplomacy, all woven into one fragile web. Such a system is powerful when it works, but it has no slack. When several shocks strike together, the failures cascade, and the whole structure can fall faster than anyone can save it. The first shock came from the sky. Scientists studying ancient pollen and chemical isotopes in the sediment of lakes and seas have found evidence of a long, severe drought settling over the eastern Mediterranean around 1200 BC. Researchers like Kanievsky and Drake traced decades of failing rains. For societies balanced on the edge, a generation of bad harvests was catastrophic. With the drought came famine. We can hear it in the letters. A Hittite king writes to Egypt, pleading for grain. It is a matter of life or death. Ships are sent with emergency cargoes of wheat. When the greatest empires on earth are begging one another for food, the foundation is already crumbling. Hungry people do not stay loyal, and hungry armies do not hold. Then the ground itself betrayed them. The eastern Mediterranean sits on restless fault lines, and geologists have found signs that a cluster of powerful earthquakes struck the region within a few decades, what one scholar called an earthquake storm. Toppled columns and crushed skeletons mark several ruined cities. An earthquake alone rarely ends a civilization, but it could shatter a world already breaking. Now the fragile web began to tear. As cities burned and seas grew dangerous, the great trade routes broke. The tin stopped flowing. Without tin, there was no bronze. Without bronze, no weapons, no tools, no wealth to tax. Each fallen city made its neighbors weaker, cutting another thread. The very connectedness that had made this world rich now carried its collapse from shore to shore. And from within, the palaces rotted. When the harvests failed and the storerooms emptied, why should farmers and soldiers keep feeding a king who could no longer protect or feed them? Some scholars believe the people themselves rose up or simply walked away, abandoning the palaces to collapse. The rigid system that recorded every sheep had no answer when its own people stopped believing in it. Picture it all together. Drought parches the fields. Famine hollows the cities. Earthquakes topple the walls. Trade routes snap, starving kingdoms of metal. Desperate people take to the sea and the road. Rulers lose their grip, and their subjects lose their faith. No single cause, but each one feeding the next, until an entire civilization everywhere at once simply comes undone. When the fires cooled, a dark age settled over the ancient world. The great palaces were never rebuilt. Populations crashed. Some regions lost the vast majority of their people within a century. The long-distance trade that had bound continents shrank to almost nothing. Skills were forgotten. For centuries, the survivors lived smaller, poorer, and more fearful lives, scattered in villages among the ruins of a grandeur they could barely comprehend. The clearest wound was the loss of memory itself. In Greece, the art of writing vanished completely. Linear B, the script of the palace scribes, was forgotten, and for roughly 400 years, the Greeks were illiterate. When writing finally returned, it was in a new alphabet, and the old script was so utterly lost it would not be deciphered until the 20th century. What the Greeks kept was not history but myth. The memory of the vanished age survived only as legend: golden heroes, mighty walls built by giants, a great war at Troy. Homer, singing centuries later, was describing a world he had never seen and only half remembered. The fall was so total that reality itself dissolved into the stuff of poetry and dream. And yet, life did not end. Slowly from the ashes, a new world began to grow, and it was born of necessity. With the tin trade broken and bronze scarce, smiths turned to a harder, humbler metal that lay in the ground almost everywhere: iron. The Iron Age rose directly from the wreckage of the bronze. Scarcity had forced a revolution. Something else rose from the ruins, small but world-changing. In the old system, writing had been the guarded secret of palace scribes. Now, among the trading towns of the Levant, a simpler tool spread: the alphabet, a few dozen signs anyone could learn. From it would descend Greek, Latin, and the very letters on your screen. Collapse had cleared the ground for something new. And in Greece, out of the silence of the Dark Age, something extraordinary eventually stirred. Without god-kings and palace bureaucracies, people gathered in new kinds of communities, the city-states, the polis. From that soil, centuries on, would grow democracy, philosophy, drama, and the classical world we still draw from. The catastrophe had, in the end, swept away one world to make room for another. But we should not rush past the loss. Real people lived through the end of their world. Scribes who watched the ships come, kings who begged for help that never arrived, families who fled into the dark. Their story is a warning across 3,000 years that a connected world can unravel with terrifying speed, and that no civilization, however golden, is promised tomorrow. The Bronze Age believed itself eternal. It was not,